I have found that as a political scientist operating in Trump's America, things happen so quickly and so often that it's almost impossible to keep up. And that's this administration's goal, is to keep heaving so much. This is out of the Steve Bannon playbook. To keep
he's
heaving,
been doing this since,
just keep so much coming at us and at the various governing institutions that a lot's going to slip through, a lot's going to get rejected in the courts, and some things will be deemed perfectly legitimate. But regardless, everybody else, all of his opponents, are on their heels all the time. So he never comes off offense. He's just never playing defense. And presidents, if you think back in, since at least Bush the first, are often on defense. But they have Congress pushing back on them and public opinion to deal with. There's all kinds of things.
And it's weird, isn't it? Because of all the presidents you would expect to have to be in that position of playing defense, you would think it would be someone like him.
You would, but I think the lesson that we take away, and the lesson that future presidents are going to take away, is that raw aggression pays off.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
Yes.
This is the new approach that Trump brought to the office, that no one else, at least no one else for hundreds of years, or 100 years or so, has really tried. And it works. Now, you have to have the personality for it. And, Trump is a singular type. It's hard to see who could follow in his footsteps on the right. I think it's easier to see who might follow in his footsteps on the left. And Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez kind of comes to mind pretty quickly.
Yeah. Well, now that you mention that, the thought occurs to me. Of course, there's a lot of time to go. This what's his name? The mayor of New York City. Do you think he has a chance at the next presidential election?
Oh God, no. I don't even think, was he even born in the U.S.?
Oh, I don't know.
I don't think he was.
Yeah.
I'm not certain. I don't pay a lot of attention to New York City politics, or for that matter, to city politics. And it's just a level at which I become disinterested. He's an interesting guy, so I paid a little bit of attention to that election, but I didn't dig too deeply into his past. I know his parents were not born here. I don't know if he was.
Mm-hmm.
So I leave that to somebody out in the ether to tell us.
This session of Words and Numbers Live, where we put a call out to listeners to throw us some interesting questions. We got a whole bunch of things from email, from Words and Numbers Backstage. I want to start off with one from George Walker, one of our longtime listeners, who sent me an article that I had actually written. I'd forgotten I'd written this a long time ago, and asked for comment. And the title of the article, this is an academic article, is Human Development and the Optimal Size of Government.
You and I talked about writing a book on this very topic.
Right, yeah. And if you look at our book, Cooperation and Coercion, the last chapter touches on this same topic. And James, if you recall, we wrote a chapter in that book, Liberty, Prosperity. It was a philosophy book. And we covered this as well. But here's the thing. There have been a number of studies that have asked the question, what level of government is most conducive to economic growth? Understanding, look, and forget about the, libertarian theory that, we shouldn't have government at all. Think about this from a practical perspective, that you need practically speaking, some sort of governmental entity in place to do the sort of heavy lifting that you either won't get from markets, or you would get it, but you're going to have to wait a while for the thing to come out. So I'm thinking about things like simply, look, we're going to, through the judicious use of eminent domain, and taxation, we're going to build a bunch of roads. And it's going to get done, and then from that point forward, markets start to build businesses and communities around this, right? This sort of thing. So there've been plenty of studies that have asked the question, what's the optimal size of government when it comes to economic growth? The idea being, of course, you probably want something, but you don't want so much that it becomes onerous. In this article that George Walker sent, I asked a slightly different question. I said, what is the optimal size of government to maximize human development? In human development, this is a measure that comes from the UN, and I love using this because no one ever accused the UN of being conservative, let alone libertarian, right? So if I can pull UN data and use it to help bolster an argument for limited government, all of a sudden I've got people listening to the argument who wouldn't have listened before. So nonetheless, UN has this thing, Human Development Index, and what they do with this is they ask the question, what's the quality of life in a country? And they look at all kinds of things, longevity, education, income does matter, of course, a whole bunch of things. They put together this index, and you can argue that whether they should or should not put in or take out certain things. And I'm not interested in that argument for the moment. I'm just going to say, look, they came up with this, and according to the UN, the higher you score on this, the better quality of life the people in your country have. Now, picture this Human Development Index, and you've got a number for every country on the planet, and this is repeated over multiple years, multiple decades. So you've got this very rich data set. And I'm asking the question, as I look over at all of these countries across all of these years, and I compare their Human Development Index to their government footprint, how big is their government relative to the size of their economy? And I ask the question, given that, what level of government gives you the maximum human development? James, it's a purely econometric thing. Well, all I'm saying here is you've got the data, you run the model, you get an answer.
Can I guess?
You got a guess?
18%.
Yes. Yeah. Astoundingly, it's about 18%. And what's astounding about that is, you and I have observed this for a long time, that it seems to be the case that regardless of what the federal government taxes, regardless of what rate it taxes at, if you add up all of the federal government's tax revenues and divide that by the size of the economy, what you find is the government collects 18%. There's something magical about this 18%. That's the answer you end up with. And lo and behold, I run this thing, and that same number comes out in the wash of the optimal size of government, 18%.
Wish I could say I was surprised, but
it's astounding.
Whenever anybody asks me a question that has anything to do with numbers in politics and economics, I automatically go to 18% and say, I'm just guessing, but is this the right number? And
right, yeah, it's like a universal constant or something.
It's like the old schoolhouse rock. 3 is a magical number. Do you remember? Turns out 18% is a magical number. All right, so I've got some follow-up questions for you. Obviously, that's not really the answer you get in the U.S. That's just the answer you get at the federal level, right? And then there's all kinds of other things, right? We know that from the Tax Foundation that our rough tax exposure is about 33%.
Yeah, if you put state and local in there as well.
State, local fees, everything all in, right, including sales taxes and what have you.
Mm-hmm.
So it's not exactly 18%. So, okay. I've been to most European countries. They're nowhere near 18%. The Scandinavian countries aren't near 18%. Now, clearly, the Asian countries all right, let me back up a giant step. Japan isn't near 18%. I don't think South Korea is either. So who is?
Yeah, at the federal level, odd that you ask that, because for a completely different reason, I looked up these numbers. Let me see if I've got anybody. I've got, Mexico at around 20%. Now, the number I'm quoting you is not directly comparable to the number we were discussing, but ballpark, it's not going to be too terribly off. Mexico, New Zealand, 21%. Israel, 23, Switzerland, 23. Now, that's interesting. When you think about New Zealand, Switzerland, South Korea is at 25. They're starting to get up there now. But those are countries that economically are quite solid.
Yeah, I was almost certain you were going to give me a list of developing countries that had been doing quite well recently.
Yeah, now there I don't have, because the list that I'm looking at, and I looked it up for a different question one of our listeners sent, this is only the OECD countries, so I don't have developing countries here. But you do remind me, in this study, I looked at all countries and then I split them into developed and developing and found something interesting. First off, in both cases, developed, developing, there's an optimal size of government, right? It gets bigger, things get better, and then it gets too big, things start to get worse. But the interesting thing, when you divide the countries into developed and developing, the optimal size of government for the developing countries is larger. The optimal size of government for the developed countries is smaller, which at a gut level you can see makes sense. If you've got a developing country, you want the government to have a bigger footprint in developing infrastructure.
Yeah.
Get infrastructure in place, get some universities in place, get things moving, and then as your economy picks up, step out of the way.
Yeah, you're making the case now for institutional arguments, right? That it's the government's responsibility by and large to foster or even found institutions and then give up control of them.
Yeah, and I back off a little bit. I don't want to say I'm making the argument that government should be doing that. This is an empirical study.
The numbers are making.
I'm simply saying that the numbers are pointing in that direction. Now, whether the government should do it or somebody else should do it, I can't say. What I can say is that you see this phenomenon.
Yeah, that's all interesting. And then, there's a set of follow-up questions about the size of government and the level of freedom of people experience.
Right.
Right, and that's very
different. Yeah, because those two are going to go in not always, but they will tend to go in opposite directions.
And, because we can point to a reasonably well-off place or a very well-off place like Singapore where you're not particularly free. Right, you have a certain degree of economic freedom, but very little social freedom.
Mm-hmm.
Or maybe it would be better to say much less than we're accustomed to.
Right. Yeah.
So there are interesting things out there, right? I suspect, I think I would go so far as to say that I'm absolutely certain there's no one-size-fits-all answer here. There's just ballpark answers that are going to make different places a lot of sense in a lot of ways, and then in other places, no sense whatsoever.
Words and Numbers Live is a members-only series in which James and I talk about issues in politics, philosophy, and economics. We take a deeper dive and then invite listeners for a live Q&A session. To participate in this exclusive series, subscribe to CiVL at CiVL.com. That's CiVL.com. Where for $5 a month or $50 for an annual subscription, you can get access to their exclusive library of content made by people who share our vision of upgrading society and making the world a better place. At CiVL.com, you can access our past episodes as well as our Words and Numbers live lecture series and see what lectures we have coming up. Find us at CiVL.com. That's CiVL.com.